Hello, I'm going to try to go through the videos or through the text material, sorry, for this week so that you can get caught up and we don't fall way behind. So this week we were going to cover 5.2 and 5.3. Those sections are adding positive, negative numbers, and subtracting positive, negative numbers. So that's what we're looking at. I'm going to promote, especially at the beginning, using a number line to help you with this. And so I'm going to talk about how you read things and what that means. Okay, so we are going to start just with a number line. I'm going to start with integers at this point. So here's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. Okay? And so I just want you to realize this is the positive direction. This is the negative direction. And right here in the middle is where we split between positive and negative. And so sometimes we have to make it from one point to 0 and then from 0 to the other point that we're looking at. So let's start with just adding some positive and negative numbers. I'm going to show you how to do this more on this number line, and then I'm going to show you how to do maybe some decimal numbers, but sometimes in the decimal numbers you have to do some work mathematically to get those answers. But let's just say we're going to start with this, -1 plus 2. So how you do that is you start at -1. This plus 2 says go to the right 2, and then you find your answer. Okay, so this is your starting point. It means I'm going to start here at -2. No, I'm not. I'm going to start here at -1, and then I'm going to go to the right 2 spaces. So if I go to the right once, I end up at 0. And if I go to the right one more time, I end up at 1. So the answer to this problem is 1. So it took 1 space to get to 0, and then it took 1 space to get to the 1. And so that's where it is. Okay. If I have -3 plus -2, that says I'm going to start at -3 right here. I'm going to go to the right, but then it says no, switch around, go to the left, because a negative direction's always this way. So I'm starting at -3, but then I'm going to the left 2 because that's a negative number. Opposite of 2. The opposite direction of 2 would be to the left. So this is the opposite of 2, which means I go left 2. Okay, so I'm going to start at -3. I'm going to go to the left 2, and so my answer is -5. Okay, so that's basically some of the information. You can do that for all sorts of problems. Mostly I don't use this if they're both positive. You guys know how to add positive numbers already. Don't confuse yourself. You know how to do them. Don't make it hard. Okay, if I have another one that may be 5 plus a -7, okay, again, I'm starting at 5, so I start at 5. This says basically I'm going to go the opposite of 7. So that would be to the left 7, okay, because it's the opposite of 7. So if I started at 5 and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I end up at -2. So my answer here is -2. Now, as you work with this, you might be able to see some other patterns, other ways to discover how to go. But what I want you to try to figure out is, look, it took 5 of them to get, so 5 of these 7 took me to get back to 0. That means I only have 2 left in the opposite side of the 0. And so that's why it's -2, because I had to go first, subtract the 5, and then I really had to go in the hole 2. If you think of it as elevation, or you're gaining yards or not gaining yards. If you started at the 5-yard line as a football player and you went -7, you would be in the back or in the end zone. They would actually get a safety on you because you'd be in there 2 yards. You'd be inside, you'd be -2, you'd be away from that 2 yards. Okay, so that's really the whole idea on addition. Addition is really simple. Now, let's just check if we had a decimal number, how are we going to do that? And I'm really going to talk you through this so that you understand it. And then I'm going to kind of show you some other suggestions. So let's say we started at 2.5 and we're going to add a -3. Okay, so again, I am starting at 2.5. Okay, so 2.5 is approximately right here. This says I'm going the opposite of 3. So that means I'm going to the left 3, because 3 would be going to the right, but I'm going the opposite, so I'm going to the left 3. So if I count, I'm going 1, 2, 3. What I end up with is I'm not on a whole number. I went from 2.5 to 1.5 to 0.5, and now I'm to -0.5. So it equals -0.5. What you're really doing here is you're saying, okay, 2.5 of this gets me back to 0. Well, if I took the 2.5 away that I had to use to get back to 0, what would be left? -0.5. You would be in the -0.5. Okay, so that's what you're really looking at it, because 2.5 minus or plus a -2.5 is really 0. But we still have a -0.5 to go, because 3 is made up of this. Okay, so that's why you have then an additional -0.5, and it equals -0.5. So a lot of times people do that, like, okay, we subtract that to get 0, and how much do I have left to go? Okay, let's look at one that maybe doesn't end up that way. Let's look at -2 plus a -1.5. So in this case, we are starting at -2, and then we're going to the left. So we start here, left 1.5. Okay, so if I go to the left, that's 1, that's 1/2 extra. Here's 1.5. I'm really at -3.5. So again, this one I don't have to zero it out. I just know I'm at -2 and I'm going farther to the left, 1.5. That makes me end up at -3.5, okay? These can help us so much with looking at them so they can see what's going on. And that is the advantage of using this process. My daughter constantly did this. She has an understanding of it that's unbelievable. But when she first started, she always drew a number line up on top and she just would look at it and say, oh, I got to go this much to get back to 0, and then I have this much left to go. And so that was really how she looked at that. Okay. Subtracting is just a little bit different, okay? Subtracting makes one change. So let's take this -2 and we're going to subtract 1, okay? Now, if you look at addition, there's a couple ways to look at this. Or subtraction. I am so sorry. Subtraction. It's defined as adding the opposite. Okay, so in this case, we can rewrite this equation to an addition problem. Okay, so -2, instead of subtracting, it's defined as adding the opposite of 1, which is -1. Because the subtraction becomes an addition sign. We take the opposite of this number, which is -1. Now we go from -2, back 1 space, that's at -3, because we're going to the left. Again, 1 space. And so that's one way of doing it, okay? I like to look at it as whether this is an add a negative or just a subtract. They mean the same thing. So when I see a problem, -2 minus 1 or -2 plus a -1, because there's just one negative, both of these say, go to the left. Go to the left. That's what that negative following our plus sign really means. Okay. The harder one, which confuses a little people, but you have a few people, but it's just, you have to just think about it logically. And I'm going to show that. Let's say we're at 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is our positive direction. This is our negative direction. And again, here we're going to be talking about the opposites, and then left for negative and right for positive. Okay. So when we are looking at a subtraction problem, let's say we have 3 minus a -1. What this says is, remember, it's adding the opposite, so I could change this to an addition sign, okay? And then we take the opposite of -1, and that becomes a 1. So that's using the definition. 3 minus, which is really the same as adding the opposite. So it's adding the opposite of -1, which is 1. That we know pretty easy. We've done this many times. It's 4. Okay, that's not hard. When you get to that point, don't make it complicated. You know those answers. Okay, let's start with a different one. Let's say we are at -1 and we are subtracting 3. Okay, again, this is really not as hard as you start at -1. Because there's only one negative, you're going to the left 3. Don't worry about changing it to adding the opposite. Just look at that as a negative 3. So it's negative 1 and a negative 3. And so negative 1 starts here, go 3 more, and we are at negative 4. Okay, so if we have subtract a negative number, it just becomes adding. If we are subtracting a positive number, it's really the same as adding a negative number, but just take it as we're going to the left 3. Okay. When we get to this one, which is negative 3 minus a negative 1, okay? At this point, again, you have to read this very carefully, okay? We are going to start at negative 3. If you want to think about it, this says go left, but then this says go opposite. So if I start left and then I have to switch and go opposite, what I'm doing is I'm going left, but then because it's the opposite, I have to switch or turn around and go in the opposite direction. So what you're really getting here is go to the left and the opposite. Well, in a sense, what that means when you take left and the opposite of negative 1, which is to the right, so this would end up being to the, where you're going left, and then you're flipping around and going on the opposite. Well, what that ends up being is if I flip from going left and I go the opposite direction, we are going to go the direction of the right. Okay, so let's look at this. We start at negative 3. It looks like I'm going to go this way, but no, it says go the opposite way of this. So I'm really going to go this way because that's the opposite of left. I'm going to go this way. How far? 1. So my answer is going to be negative 2. That problem actually changes into negative 3 minus, that means left, but the opposite of that, which is plus 1. Okay, and most people remember it this way. If in subtraction you have 2 negatives, put them together to make a positive. Flip them around and make them a positive. So if I look at negative 3 minus a negative 1, a lot of people go like this, and that just means it's plus 1. Okay, other people do this. It's negative 3 minus a negative 1. They change it to negative 3, the minus, and the 1. They put them together like that because one's going the opposite. Okay, but again, when you have a negative, you start out going left, then this second negative says, no, go the opposite of left, which ends up being right. Okay, so whenever you see a subtract a negative number, it will always end up being that you're going in the right direction. You're going to move in the right direction. So anytime it's a number minus a negative number, that results in adding or going to the right. So that's really all you have to know about looking at these, doing these, and just thinking through that. Again, this number line I like to show going to the left, going opposite of that. That helps me to remember we're going that direction. So I can show that. It's very easy to show, to see, to understand as I'm going through it. People don't like to write it down because they think, oh, that's not important. It is extremely important because it puts it into your head, and now you can start to visualize that without the number line. So if you start using the number line, it will eventually get into your head so you can see it as you're working those, and it will become much, much easier for you.